In topic 4.5, we're going to be learning how to solve quadratic equations using another method. This method is going to be called completing the square. Now, in order to complete the square, you need to understand what a perfect square trinomial is, so you can know where the c that we're using comes from. So if you have a binomial, like let's say x plus 5 squared, it can be written as x plus 5 times x plus 5. And when you distribute or multiply everything out, you get x squared plus 10x plus 25. Now, in these problems, we're going to be making the c work so that these problems are perfect squares and can be rewritten as a square. So here, we're going to look at our b's. And what we're going to do is we're going to divide them by 2. So here, 10 divided by 2 is 5. So that's where this comes into play. So our binomial is going to have that b divided by 2 in it. And then in your trinomial, if it's a perfect square, your c will be that b divided by 2 squared. So our 5, if we square it, we get 25. So we're going to be writing our trinomials in this form, x squared plus bx plus b over 2 squared, because if you do that, then you can later write it as a binomial, x plus b over 2 squared. If you have it as a binomial, then you can do square root to get rid of the square. It becomes easier to solve. So our main thing when we're completing the square is to remember that your c, you're going to take b divided by 2 and then square it. So here, let's practice doing that. We're going to find the value of c that makes these expressions a perfect square trinomial. Then we'll write them as a binomial. As a binomial squared, sorry. So here, if we look at this problem, I'm going to focus on my b. Right now, it's a 12. So I'm going to do 12 divided by 2, and that's 6. And our c is going to be that 6, what we got when we divided by 2, squared. If you do 6 squared, that comes out to 36. So the c that makes this a perfect square trinomial is the number 36. And we can then write our expression as a square of a binomial. So we have x, and when we divide it by 2, we got 6. So that goes in our binomial squared. For question 2, our b is negative 6. So negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. So when I write my c, I'm going to write negative 3 squared. And then negative 3 squared is a positive 9. So that's the c that we want for this to be a perfect square trinomial. And then if we want to write it now as a square of a binomial, we would write it x minus 3 squared. When you're writing them as binomials, you're basically taking the number that you got when you divided by 2. So here, if you see, we have 6 squared. That's where that 6 came in here. And here we have negative 3 squared. Here you can see that negative 3 in here. In this next problem, our b is negative 8. So I'm going to do negative 8 divided by 2. That gives me negative 4. So I write x squared minus 8x plus negative 4 squared for my c. Remember that negative 4, we're going to end up using it later when we transfer this back to a binomial. So I have x squared minus 8x. Negative 4 squared is 16. So my c value that makes this a perfect square trinomial is 16. And now if I rewrite it as a square of a binomial, I write x, and I take that negative 4 from earlier, and then write it squared. Both these numbers are going to be important. The number you get when you square it, so like in this last example, the 16, that's going to be important when we're solving because we're going to have to add it to both sides. And then that negative 4 is important when we're solving because if you rewrite it as a binomial squared, then later you can take the square root. So just remember c, When you're doing the completing the square method, you take b, divide it by 2, and then you square it.